I used to be Mexican.
Yes. Okay. You say that to me often. Almost every time we talk, you're like, I used to be Mexican. This used to be. Will you talk to me?
I used to be Mexican. I became an American citizen, so I'm not Mexican anymore. How do I identify? I identify as a Mexican that became an American citizen.
So Mexican-American.
No, because Mexican-American applies to you.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to episode 2 of Conversations with My Parents. After releasing the first episode, I was faced with feedback from my parents. Well, from my mom in particular, who, while loving the episode, had only one piece of feedback. And that one piece of feedback was that she didn't think I could identify as first-generation Mexican-American. She doesn't think that because on my dad's side, my dad is first-generation Mexican-American because my dad's dad was from Mexico. And hearing my mom tell me that was so surreal because she is an immigrant. I mean, I see where she's coming from. Like, where's the definition? And I guess one of the many questions I have around this topic is who gets to define how we identify? I think it's us, that we get to define how we identify, and nobody else gets to define it for us. So, for today's episode, right? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about identity, delving in and trying to uncover our own true identities. So here we go, talking race and identity with Marina and Rudy on Conversations with My Parents. So inspired from like the categories on forms that you have to, that we as people have to fill out. And it's like, How do you identify? You don't have to look at it, Mom. I'll read it to you.
Okay. Well, I thought about it, and most of them, they give you the choice between white and black, and I've been told that I needed to check white. But then they do a sub-category, and that's where I usually put Hispanic. I don't remember having seen Mexican-American.
I've only ever seen it once.
So I usually put Hispanic.
And do you ever, on the forms that you have to fill out, do you ever have to Latino and Hispanic?
They don't ever put Latino. No. Not that I've written. The last forms that I would have had to do, they don't ever have Latino. They put Hispanic.
And you have to put that you're white. Like it's white and black, and you have to say that you're white?
Yeah. I was told that that's what I needed to put when I asked. And I don't remember who I asked. But at UTEP, we used to fill those forms. And that's what, you're not Indian, you're not black. So put white. And then, like I said, it's a subcategory. That's where the Hispanic would come into play. I haven't filled up forms in years, mija.
I guess I'm starting with forms because in any official document that I've had to fill out, college application, applying for my driver's license, or the census, I had to define how I identified with gender or with race. And once I got into college, I felt like I had to fill out all of these forms that made me check boxes. And apparently I'm a pugilist and I have to fight everything. I just revolted against having to name what I was. And nowadays, it's like I go to apply for a mailing because I like a group. And there's a demographic form where I have to identify my race and background. And we're just asking for it everywhere. Nowadays, I don't have to mark that I'm white because I'm not white. But I have to put, and I have issue with it. I have to check that I'm both a Latino and a Hispanic. And I've been having to make that distinction since high school. You know, and I always had issue because I'd be like, what's the difference between a Latino and a Hispanic? I never knew until like recently, like the past like 2 to 5 years. I never understood what the difference was between those two terms.
Mm-hmm. My understanding was that they were grouping all the Spanish-talking people as Hispanic.
And then Latinos are all the Latin people from Latin America.
From Latin America.
So I am both. I am both Latino and Hispanic.
Right. Are you from Latin America?
My family is.
Okay.
I'm from El Paso, Texas.
Yeah.
Which, depending on who you ask, some people, I mean, which is technically a part of the United States. So I am a United States citizen. But depending on who you ask, some people say it's a part of Mexico.
There's still such ignorance, huh?
How do you, well, okay, so that's how you fill out a form, but like, how do you identify? How do you identify yourself?
I identify myself as me, moi.
And what does that mean, Mother?
I used to be Mexican.
Yes, okay. You say that to me all like often. Almost every time we talk, you're like, I used to be Mexican. This used to be. Will you talk to me?
I used to be Mexican. I became an American citizen, so I'm not Mexican anymore. How do I identify? I identify as a Mexican that became an American citizen.
So Mexican American.
No, because Mexican American applies to you. That you are born here, but you're of Mexican descent. I'm not Mexican American. I am Mexican that became a citizen.
So I was wondering if we can start there. Like when you fill out whatever government or city or whatever forms that you have those boxes, what do you check?
Depends how I'm feeling. Sometimes I just put American.
Really?
Yes.
Is it like why?
I'm Hispanic American. Huh?
Yeah. Why? Will you just talk to me like or yeah, like why? Why does it depend on how you're feeling? Like what are the different feelings? What do you go through?
No, I mean it just. I don't think that it's. I mean, why include race? If you're an American, you're an American citizen, right?
Getting into this conversation about how my parents identify, right, I really start to see that both of my parents say U.S. citizen, right? And I feel like it's this immigrant mindset, right? My dad got it from my grandpa. My mom, I think, got it because of her experience, right? It's this identity that they worked so hard to achieve in this pride in this country, this experiment of this country, right? This land of opportunity, this place where we can dream and be anything that we want, right? So this pride that I think both of them, and my dad especially, still buy into, right? The American dream. So identifying as a U.S. citizen is a place of pride. Have you ever heard the term POC, or person of color?
Person of color I have. The BICO.
We'll get there. Hang on. Okay. So, a person of color, you have heard of it. What do you think of that? Yeah. What do you think of that term as a grouping of, as an identifier of a group of people?
Well, if you must use it to identify a group, I guess that's a good way of identifying them.
Would you consider
I am.
Would you consider yourself a person of color?
Yeah, I'm brown. Okay. I'm coffee.
You are coffee.
I'm coffee. I'm latte coffee.
You're a latte.
Yeah, I'm a latte. With milk. Coffee with milk.
Café con leche. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And you said you have never heard of BIPOC. What it stands for is Black, Indigenous people or person of color. Right? So what they've done is, if we POC, person of color, came out of the civil rights movement, right, as a way to identify all non-white people or people who are being marginalized and discriminated against, right? That's the origin of POC. people of color, person of color. And now BIPOC, they've added the B and the I in front of it, which, I have issue with all of these things, even though I identify as a person of color and I identify as BIPOC, right? Because I'm a person of color. They've taken out Black and Indigenous as a way of highlighting that a lot of systemic racism or a lot of prejudice, a lot of bigotry, a lot of hatred has been unfairly targeted towards Black and Indigenous folk. So this new term, BIPOC, has come out as a way of honoring, highlighting.
I don't think that that's honoring them. I think that that's discriminating. It sounds discriminatory.
BIPOC? Black, Indigenous. I mean, it's been created by people of color. It's like how Black, Indigenous people of color are choosing to identify right now. BIPOC. But you feel like it makes us just...
well, it's more discriminatory, yes, because it lends to more separation.
This is a familiar sentiment. I was raised by my mother as a humanist, as one tiny part of a human family. So I guess now I'm discovering in having to identify myself as Latinx or Hispanic or different, that this is why I fight it, because I was raised not to separate myself from others. And yet, as this year has made horrifically clear, a big flashing neon sign, our experiences are different because of the constructs placed on us by society. So this week's theme, race and identity. And I just want to start by asking, I've always had issues when filling out forms, checking the boxes. I'm just always I'm a human being. What do you need to know about me? Why do you need to know this stuff? And I've always had huge issues with having to say both Latino and Hispanic, or Latina and Hispanic.
No, I mean, I don't think that why include race? If you're an American, you're an American citizen, right?
Why include race, right? Yes, and race is a huge part of it, right? This is part of what I'm learning about. I wish I knew so much more than I do, but race is a huge part of it, and I guess I'm trying to figure out why.
A lot of that, I think, and this is my opinion, stems back to when the different races wanted to be given privileges for equality. And so in order to figure out what race you belong to, they asked that question. When we were asked by some of our clients to file for minority status, it was based on race or gender to get the minority status for the Miles group, and the government would give them some credits if they use minority businesses.
Yeah, so
I think that all comes because of that, not for any other reason.
No, I think you're right, Dad. I think it is stemming from a place of wanting to create equity, right? To create this so far.
We already had the business.
Wait, what?
We already had the business.
Yeah.
But in order for them to get credit, we had to become a minority.
And what were those credits for? What do you mean? What kind of credits?
To be able to sell, for example, the ones that asked us to do that were the auto industry. And that way the government would buy more automobiles from them if they used minority businesses or vendors.
So it made them more palatable to the government. It made us more palatable.
Well, all that stems, I think, because the Democrats wanted to make sure that everybody was treated equal.
Only the Democrats?
Or the minorities. I don't want to say Democrats versus Republicans, but I mean, some of the liberals, wanted that for the government to buy from minorities.
So wading through the Fox News propaganda and listening or trying to listen for the core of what my dad is talking about, is that I find myself agreeing with him. I mean, this happens a lot, actually, that these terms, having to identify in a certain way with our heritage or race, it's othering through these identifiers, these groupings, non-white and white as categories. We are centering whiteness as the norm, or as the Platonic ideal, even, because the norm that is defined by the government is white. And the government is saying white equals norm. Okay, so I wonder have you ever heard the term POC, or person of color?
Person of color, yeah.
Do you identify as a person of color?
Do I?
Yeah.
No.
What do you
I
think?
think we're all got color. Whether we're white, brown, black, yellow, we're all got some kind of color.
Right.
Right.
So what do you think of that term?
I don't like it because everybody has some color.
Totally.
I mean, what are they trying to? The darker you are, the more you are a person of color, or what?
Yeah, I mean, my understanding of it's a term that came out of the civil rights movement as a way to say, as a way to like try to find equitable systems, and again to make things fair, right? So POC, or person of color, is something that I've identified with, and I find it interesting because I didn't race wasn't a thing for me growing up on the border ever, and really didn't. The further away from the border that I got, the more race became, and my experience with racism became a thing. And so now, living in one of the whitest states and cities in our country, it's so interesting to me how these past 12 years have really had me found and ground my identity in my Mexicanness, my color, if you will. Have you heard the term of Latinx?
Nope.
Uh-huh. So this is, again, a newer term, and it's being used and introduced nowadays to talk about, since since Spanish is a gendered language, Latinx is a way to include non-binary people who don't identify as a female or a male, but so that they would be able to claim Latinx. They wouldn't have to choose a gender just because the language is gendered.
Okay.
So it's another way of inclusion.
Or exclusion.
Why do you feel why would that be exclusion?
Well, because if the way I'm perceiving it is that if they are giving themselves more titles, it's more separation, and there's, instead of inclusion to me means coming together and forming a one, right? Include. So if you have the block, or what did you say it was? The block? BIPOC, the blacks, the Indians, the Mexicans, the Puerto Ricanos, the Latinas, Latinx. Now we have all these little titles for different groups. That to me, it's a waste of energy and time.
Why?
Because I see it as exclusive, not inclusive.
Can I challenge that, Mom, in saying that we're not within this BIPOC group, we're not separating ourselves. We're just being specific with who we are, because that way we're acknowledging that not everybody's experience has been the same. I identify with Black people in a way, but also I don't in a way. I don't come from slavery. My my race did not experience the atrocities of slavery, do you know, where some of my friends are descendants of.
I beg to differ.
Please differ me.
When the Spanish came to Mexico City, Tenochtitlan, they enslaved the Aztecs. I'm a direct descendant of the Aztecs.
We're Aztec! That's something I wanted to know. Thank you.
We are Aztecs. And they enslaved the Aztecs, and they took away their culture. They destroyed their culture.
So yeah, now we're coming up on this, like based on our conversation this summer. You don't believe in systemic, or you don't think there's such a thing as systemic racism?
Not by the United States of America. Now, there may be racism in individuals.
Yeah.
There's some individuals that are going to be racist because they were born racist, raised to be racist, not born.
Yeah.
Raised to be racist. Okay. But I don't think the United States of America is racist.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, Dad. I think that we were a country founded with slavery. We got to reckon with that. Like that, the institution.
No. We were not founded with slavery. The whole world had slaves.
Which?
Okay? And they brought slaves.
Yeah.
They brought slaves, okay, because they had them in Europe, they had them in England, they had them everywhere. Okay, but it wasn't founded with slavery.
Well, they were, yeah.
In fact, the people that came to the United States were trying to get away from religious persecution. And that's why they came to the United States.
Right.
And that's why in the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, you have what it says. I mean, you know.
What does it say?
Freedom of religion, and all men are created equal. And you can read it. I mean, that's why it was founded that way. We weren't founded with slavery. Slavery was part of the world society at the point.
So my dad is wrong. And I couldn't say it to him at the time for many reasons. Because this was the first time we were talking about race. I mean, this was the first time we were having any kind of deep conversation around history. Just skirting around our politics and our differences of beliefs. And out of respect for my elder, my father, and all that he has given me, I didn't want to embarrass him. Yeah, but then you get into it, Dad, and right, it defines being a woman, and again this term, this woman of color, right? The Constitution isn't the best. It favors white men. It was written by white men, and it favors white men. It did not in the Constitution, right? It says that black-skinned people who were brought here from wherever, Europe, Africa, and were owned as property, that they were considered less than. Right? Yeah, but
that all changed. No, I mean, that all changed with the Emancipation
Proclamation. Yes. But did it?
Okay.
I mean,
yes.
It did.
Oh, it did.
It did.
It did. The problem being that they weren't educated. And so it takes a generation or two before they could be educated to fit into society and become a part of a functioning society. It wasn't because they were black or white or whatever. It just takes time to educate. And as long as you have the educational opportunities, and that happened, I mean, I think from Lincoln's time into the 60s, when you had the Martin Luther King marching for equality and segregation,
yeah,
all that changed. But the opportunities are there to get an education now, and some of them have taken advantage, and some have not. Okay, and I'm not talking about just blacks. I'm talking about Hispanics too.
We haven't taken advantage of what? I wish I could go and ask my dad to clarify, but to be honest, given the opportunity, I don't think I would wade into this conversation ever again, even plied with shots of tequila, because this shows the insidiousness of white supremacy. We are so indoctrinated in white supremacy that we turn against ourselves. We're unwilling to name systemic racism and instead trying to couch it as a lack of education or lack of ambition. Every time we've talked about around race and this a little bit, like the 2 times now that we've talked about it, Dad, you've said, if you work hard, you will succeed.
I believe that.
I know you do, because because that's your experience, because you've worked incredibly hard and you've been incredibly successful. And I understand that. And that's something that was modeled to you by Grandpa and Grandma, right? Like, Grandpa worked incredibly hard and was incredibly successful and was an incredible man for all that I know. So I know that you believe that, and I know why. But I think still using this phrase, like, I find it lacking a little bit, because I don't think that everybody gets the same I don't think everybody gets that same opportunity. I think there are parts in this country where somebody can work hard, like you being denied, like your experience being denied being class president, or was that the story, right? Right, like...
That happens.
That happens, and I think that some people get discriminated against because they're black or brown or not white, right? Whatever. I think there's a lot of people...
I'm not going to argue that.
Right. So I think that it's hard for me to, like, I understand why you think that, but it's hard for me to really, like, apply that as a general truth, because I think so many people do work hard and do not succeed because of racism, because of systemic racism.
I can see that, but I mean, I think you could overcome some things like that. I mean, look at all the Hispanics that have risen up to become great politicians. Look at all the blacks that have risen up and become successful in whatever their career paths were.
Totally.
I mean, it's not. They didn't get there because they were black or because they were white. They got there because they were smart and they worked hard. Colin Powell. I mean, he's a good example of somebody that made it as a black person.
I mean, Barack Obama.
Great statesman. I mean, he's a very good orator. I don't like his political views, but I think he was very eloquent in the way he spoke, and he became president.
My dad, not light-skinned. My dad, very dark-skinned. So I think that feels important to say. And I don't think my dad identifies as white, but like he says American, but I think he's Mexican and says we are 100% Mexican. But I think his politics are 100% aligned with this. Because he was an entrepreneur in the 80s, he benefited highly and was a highly successful businessman from everything that was happening and all the laws that were going into effect benefiting his decisions, right? So I also wonder if part of his justification and part of why I freeze or have a hard time refuting my dad is because it is not lost on me. Like, my dad paid for my education. I did not have to take out one single loan for any of my education. And that is through high school and graduate school. And even into professional training. Like, I could still, to this day, call my dad and ask him, hey, Dad, there's this $3,000 training that I really want to go to, and he would pay for it. He would give me the money. Like, anytime I want to educate myself, he will pay for it because he believes in education that much. So there's that cognitive dissonance with me. Because of him, I am where I am, and because of where I am, I've gotten educated in a way that he hasn't. And so I think that I want to engage in this conversations with him, but I also don't want to be that asshole child who schools her parent, who is literally the shoulders that I am standing on. I wonder, Mom, if you believe if the United States is a racist institution.
Yes, unfortunately. I'll give you just a quick example. I just watched, and I recommend that you watch, 2 movies on Netflix that made a big impact. the trial of the Chicago 7 and the 3 deaths of, of who? I forgot her name. I'll look on Netflix and I'll text you. That's the story. It's a documentary about the woman that her daughter got killed, and in Juarez, and she protested and protested and protested and made a lot of noise, and they caught the guy, and then the guy went and joined the cartels, so he was protected by the cartels, and then she got executed.
The 3 deaths of Marisela Escobedo?
Correcto. I recommend you watch those 2. But the first one, the trial of the Chicago 7, I lived all that. I lived it because I was in this country at that time. I was watching television. I started watching the conventions, being fascinated by the work the American government worked, because in Juarez, politics was something women didn't talk about. So it was also an opening to enhance my education. And I watched all that on television, so I lived it. And sadly enough, I'm living it again, 54 years later, and nothing has changed. And it's very depressing. It's really, really depressing that in 54 years, it was hidden under the carpet when the other presidents were in charge. But when this president came out, he took all that out of the carpet, and he started encouraging all the people that are anti-Black, anti-Mexican, the white supremacists. And we didn't think that they were around anymore. And unfortunately, there was enough of them to elect the president. So that's scary. That is real scary.
I mean, do you think...
Did I answer?
Sorry, go ahead.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, well, I have a follow-up question. Do you think that the U.S. is a white supremacist institution?
Right now it is.
Only right now?
Well, yes. I don't think I have ever felt it so strongly as now.
I don't know how to begin to process the difference within my parents' views on this country and its history and legacy. Maybe I should end with the question I entered in with. What is identity and who defines it for us? For me, through this work and with the help of my friends, I've discovered that if it's a bureaucratic entity telling me how to define, I resent it. But if it's my choice to choose and share my culture and heritage, I'm over the moon and filled with pride and stories and food and parties and liquor. I identify proudly as, on my mother's side, first-generation Mexican-American, a Latinx, Latina, Latine, Hispanic, POC, BIPOC artist living in Portland, Oregon. And through this conversation, I did get more curious about my indigeneity. As I begin to wade through all of the different layers and complexities of our country, our culture, my family, and mainly myself, I begin searching for my roots, my indigenous roots, the side that feels connected to my mother. It's there where I encounter the colonizer, the conqueror, the Spanish, the side that feels connected to my father. And I begin to ask the big question, how can I reconcile having both within myself? So next time, I'm delving into my genetic code. I've spit into a tube and had my DNA studied, logged, and broken down into Ancestry. Next time on Conversations with My Parents, where, in DNA fact, am I from? Thanks so much for listening and going along on the ride.